The Last of Us TV show has been a fun ride so far, and as a fan of the games, it feels like season 1 is a 9-week long celebration of this masterpiece. And although the show has been pretty faithful, they have made some changes, some of which are fairly small, but others are pretty significant deviations that have even generated a little bit of controversy. And I want to talk about one such moment that occurred in episode 2. Dr. Pooplove here, and today I want to explain the now infamous kiss and why changes were made to this emotional scene with Tess. And stick around until the end because I will explore why this version actually works for me. But let's get right into it. And to start off, we need to talk about how the Capitol scene occurred in the game. After Joel, Tess, and Ellie make it to the Capitol building, they discover that the Fireflies have been killed. And Tess, who knows she has been bitten in the museum, is frantically searching for a solution. Ultimately, she admits to Joel and Ellie that she has been bitten, and there is actually a spark of hope in her for the future of humanity after having met Ellie. So she makes a final plea to Joel for him to continue the Firefly mission and bring Ellie to Tommy in hopes of being able to locate the Fireflies and develop the cure. But Fedra is en route, and so she says goodbye and sacrifices herself, vowing to not turn into one of those infected, and she tries to take some Fedra out with her in the process, as Joel and Ellie flee the scene. Now, of course, some of the same events occur in the TV show, but there are some key differences. For one, Fedra is not the enemy assaulting the Capitol building, but instead it is a horde of infected. Now, the reason for this is explained by showrunner Craig Mazin, who explains that they could not justify why Fedra would want to go that far outside the QZ and risk their lives. Their motivation is to protect the Boston QZ and maintain their power. And so with the Fireflies and smugglers gone, they now actually have a safer QZ to deal with. And so the Fireflies, Joel and Tess and Ellie will likely just be handled by the harshness that exists in the outside world. And I actually think that this rationale makes sense. And I do appreciate that Craig Mazin is taking some steps to kind of pick things apart and, in his own words, ask some pesky questions that challenge the original story in pursuit of making this story more palatable to TV show going audiences. Additionally, this change makes sense from a storytelling perspective. The episode does a lot to set up the rules of the infected, and especially this new tendril mechanic that they have. And so having a moment where we are actually able to see the true danger of these tendrils in action is pretty important. Now, upon arriving at the Capitol, much of the conversation that occurs about Tess being infected and sending Joel and Ellie off is fairly similar, except that she tells Joel to go to take Ellie to Bill and Frank instead of Tommy. To me, I'm not sure if this change makes total sense. Perhaps it may pay off later, but it seems that having Joel go to Tommy, who actually might know where his former Firefly friends are, kind of makes more sense, with Joel needing to stop by Billstown as a potential way to get a car. The problem here in the TV show is mostly it kind of just seems a little bit less straightforward as to what Ellie and Joel's intended goal really is. It makes it seem like they are just going to be meandering around, and if I were new to The Last of Us, I wonder if this would be enough to keep me interested. But we will see how they get there, so I won't judge that piece too early. But Tess begins to set the place up to explode by pouring gasoline all over the floor and throwing a bunch of grenades around, and as Joel and Ellie run away, she starts to get her lighter out, trying to flick it on. The camera blurs, giving us her perspective of almost overwhelming dread and angst that must be taking over as she eventually gets noticed. Although she is already infected, what looks like a stalker takes her over with a kiss as she drops the lighter to blow the place up. And this is what a lot of people seem to have an issue with. It is a bit weird that the stalker lays a big wet one on Tess, but at the same time, I kind of think it's poetic and it just works for me. But let me explain first. For one, it's a bit sadly beautiful as Tess pleads with Joel to take Ellie to Bill and Frank. And in this moment, she confesses some of her feelings for him and recognizes that those feelings are not exactly mutual. But then Joel accepts her plan pretty quickly and runs away without as much as a second glance. Although she can't really get a goodbye kiss from Joel as that would infect him, she doesn't get any parting affection from him. And instead, she gets that affection from the infected stalker, who basically welcomes her into the herd. It's this really haunting and powerful moment. And For me, this seemed like a much more scary moment than having some radical violence occur, as you just see her slowly having to succumb to her fate. But beyond the poetry of it, it just kind of makes perfect sense from a practical standpoint. The mycelium seems to reside in the throats of the infected, and so mouth to mouth is perhaps the easiest way to transmit the cordyceps. But most people are fighting against the infected when they're after them, and they're resistant. And this prompts violence from the other side. But Tess is essentially standing there, not putting up a visible fight, beyond flicking her lighter. It makes more sense that the stalker does not need to resort to violence, and so he's walking over to peacefully transfer the mycelium. She is already infected though, so perhaps it's not totally necessary, but assuming she hasn't fully turned yet, I'm guessing that the infected don't fully know that she already is one of them. But regardless, this moment really just worked for me. It was both practical and kind of beautiful and poetic in its execution. And I think it actually is more memorable. And to top it all off, this might even be a more believable turn of events as well. But what do you think? Did this moment work for you? And if you want to hear more of my in-depth thoughts and analysis about this show, then you should check out my weekly review discussion and play along series, where I'm actually playing the game along with the events of the show. And you can find that right here. But otherwise, so long, Pooper Troopers.